Of course, the city of Hamilton has until Tuesday to come up with a stadium proposal. Problem is, they are $25 million short and the clock is ticking. Well, joining us now to make sense of it all is Nick Bontis, an award-winning professor from the DeGroote School of Business. Nice to have you with us again.
Happy Friday, Taz.
Thank you so much, Nick. Well, the stadium saga, it continues to have more twists and turns than a Hollywood movie. Of course, now Mayor Bob Bertina is saying that the cost estimates from Infrastructure Ontario are artificially high. What are the chances that there's any credence to that?
Well, it's amazing how we've been talking about this for over a year, and there's only really a few hours left. I mean, on Monday and Tuesday, we're going to find out if we, in fact, will have a stadium here in Hamilton. And with regards to our Infrastructure Ontario artificially rising prices, they do that because we know this to be true about construction projects. Construction projects always have overruns. They're always delayed. Costs of materials rise. You never get those actually assumptions put into the original proposal. So I think they did overestimate, which is a good thing. The bad news, though, is we're still about $25 million out that somehow Dalton has to, push in for that final push. Is $25 million a lot of money? I'm giving high probability that he's going to make up the difference. Where I'm really nervous, Taz, honestly, is that the city of Hamilton went from a flat fee of, let's say, we owed $40 million to now this percentage variable fee that could rise if the cost of the project rises over time. So that's where I'm a little bit nervous.
Well, when you talk about perhaps Infrastructure Ontario's numbers being a bit off, I don't think they're $25 million off. Is that a safe assumption?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the end we're going to be, paying somewhere in between, as they said, between $40 or $70 million. It's somewhere going to be in there. At the end of the day, it's really about the province of Ontario finally deciding, does Hamilton and or the Ticats and or the city deserve this new stadium? It's just still amazing to me that we've come full circle again from West Harbour and from this place and that place and this place, and the Ticats have gone back on what they wanted and what they don't want. So, at the end of the day, I just want this issue to be put to bed so we can have something. Whether it's the old stadium and the sequel, just let's have something in the city.
An extremely unfair question. Do you think we're going to be able to hammer out a deal by the deadline?
Yeah. So I think we will, because now it's crunch time. I mean, for months and months and months, everybody knew that the deadline was far away somewhere into the future. Now this is it. So can we now attract private investment to actually come and sponsor the stadium and actually make it fly? I mean, that's the real question. That's what makes me really nervous. I'll tell you why. Because we haven't been able to do that for a whole year. I mean, let's face it. We had all these grandiose ideas for stadiums. No private investor actually came in and said, you know what, I'm going to give you $50 million for that. So to think that all of a sudden now we're going to be able to make the difference over the next couple of months, I'm a little bit nervous about that too. We still don't have a knack in the city of Hamilton of selling ourselves as good as we can.
A very good point. Yeah. Let's move on to food prices. Around the world, food prices have hit a record high, and they are expected to climb even further. That from the UN. And they're attributing that to erratic weather patterns. And we've seen a lot of that this year.
Yes, we have. The biggest jump, of course, was for corn and wheat. And in fact, corn and wheat are up 50% in the last year, which is amazing because that's such a staple for so much food. And you know what? The biggest actually problem was in Australia. If you recall, we had a massive drought for months and months and months in Australia. And then now they're suffering from massive floods. So, of course, when you have a country the size of Australia and they take away a significant portion of their supply, demand is still the same or higher. That screws up the macroeconomics of the formula. But I think in terms of pricing right now going into the future, a lot of analysts have said that it's stabilized. So there might be a dip of maybe only 5% in 2011 for corn and wheat prices. But generally speaking, right now, it seems that supply and demand are at that equilibrium formula.
And we're going to feel that even though here in Canada we grow a lot of those products, corn and wheat.
We are, because there's a lot of other large producers around the world. You think of China, you think of Russia, you think of India. Now what they're doing is, because prices are getting up higher, is they're now restricting exports, which means that in a sense from a global marketplace there's only so much wheat and grain to go around. Canada is safe in that regard, but there are other countries, we've heard of Algeria, for example, where price of food has skyrocketed because they're importing a lot of their grain and wheat. So at the end of the day, the good news is that we have a nice, healthy agricultural sector in this country. So that's the good news.
What other factors are at play here? You talked about Algeria. We were talking about Egypt earlier this half hour, so we know that the price of food is going up there. Is transportation a big factor as well?
Obviously, with the price of oil as high as it is, you got to ship this stuff, whether it's by boat or by truck or by train or what have you. And this also now influences the cost of living. It also influences inflation because these are such staple foods in the basket of goods that a household needs. So when you have those inflationary problems like they were struggling with in Algeria, you know, that's when you had that type of citizenry unrest. The good news is, of course, in Canada, I think we're okay.
Well, when McDonald's says it has to raise its prices, you know that there's a problem.
That's right.
I think, because they're known for their affordable prices. Let's talk about another mode of transportation, and that would be airplanes. You wanted to make reference to that with the World Economic Forum. My question is, how is this any different from the G8 meetings that we have? And I understand that there are, you know, economists and social activists who are already a part of this. But, I mean, really, at the end of the day, isn't it the politicians who are making the decisions, and isn't that what the G8 was all about?
Well, the good news is that it's not just the politicians, and that is the biggest difference between the G8 and the World Economic Forum in Davos. Whereas the G8 is about presidents, prime ministers, and ministries of finance, the World Economic Forum in Davos is about those politicians plus business leaders, plus young entrepreneurs, plus journalists, plus even academics, thank goodness for that. So it's a much more transparent forum. In fact, all the sessions are streamed online, whereas in the G8 and a lot of those meetings, there's a lot of secrecy and privacy. So the interesting thing about industries that are changing coming out of the World Economic Forum is they talked about the airline industries, the world airline industry, which is actually doing quite well, which is good news because they had some bailouts coming out of 9/11 and also coming out of the economic recession that we had 2 years ago. So the average fares for airlines around the world is up 14%. Not good for the consumer, but actually good for the airline industry. Profits are okay, $500 million in revenue, which is great. The other thing that, of course, they're working on is understanding consolidation because, you know, we now just have major players around the world. British Airways is now partnered up with Iberia,
Okay,
Lufthansa.
so they've identified the problem, but, I mean, how do you get the costs to go down? Because oil is shooting through the roof.
So one of the things that they're talking about, Taz, is
OPEC a part of,
no.
this? Okay.
They're talking about this concept called cabotage.
All right.
Let me explain what cabotage means. A lot of countries now have rules that a foreign airline cannot pick up a domestic passenger and drop it off in a domestic city. Let me give you an example. Imagine Lufthansa coming from Germany, picking up passengers in Montreal and then dropping them off in Toronto. In other words, competing for that Montreal-Toronto leg. We don't allow that in Canada. Only Air Canada and WestJet can compete for those domestic markets. But what happens if cabotage gets lifted? So you have any airline around the world being able to pick up any passenger in any city and dropping them off in any city. Why is this a good thing for the consumer? Because it creates competition. And the only way you can lower prices and stabilize the marketplace is by increased competition. Cabotage is not going to be lifted in Canada or the U.S. anytime soon, but there are countries around the world that are lifting cabotage because of the consolidation.
Well, you look at what Canada's talking about with the UAE. They won't even allow more flights in.
That's right.
You really think Canada's going to agree to this?
No. Still, we have too much protectionism. We have too large airlines in Canada, and Canada does not have the market to support too large airlines.
Really quickly, we're running out of time. Potash stocks, investors snapping this up. What's fueling this demand for this?
Fertilizer. We need fertilizer for food.
Yep.
2 billion people in China, 1.1 billion people in India. They're eating a lot. They need grain and wheat. They need fertilizer. Huge farmland opportunities. Potash stock price, let me check my notes here, was $90 back in July. It's now trading almost double that. You bought that stock, you made 100% return in 6 months. I didn't buy it, but it's also looking that stock has upward trending over the next couple of months.
And that is one we will be watching. Nick, you had a couple of notes you wanted to share with us.
So I am putting on my Ronald McDonald nose. Why? Because I am supporting the Ronald McDonald House here in Hamilton. Everybody knows about it. Main Street near the hospital, supporting families. They have a large campaign right now going from 15 rooms to 40 rooms. And I want to give props to my students at McMaster University who are trying to raise money for Ronald McDonald House. Go to growourhome.ca and props to the Infinity team for Mars Apprentice. Thank you very much, Taz, for that plug.
All right, notice that the nose matches with the tie. Very nicely done. All right, that is Bontis on Business for this week. Be sure to check out his website, nickbontis.com. Nick, always a pleasure having you.
Thank you.